Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursday Talks with Chug. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. I'm Ariana Gonzalez from Chug Attorneys and CPAs, tuning in from our San Diego office. Please join me in welcoming attorney Jocelyn Juarez Contreras from our headquarters in Los Angeles. Hi there, Jocelyn, and welcome.
Hi, Ariana. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. For today's topic, we're going to be talking about H-1B cap updates. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started, this conversation is for informational purposes only. It does not create an attorney-client relationship. So if you do have questions, please comment them below or email us anytime at info@chug.com. Let's get right into it, Jocelyn. Can you tell us what exactly changed under the new H-1B cap registration rule that was released in December, and why does it matter?
Yeah, great question. So, Ariana, in late December, there is a posting of the rule that was briefly mentioned earlier in the year regarding the change in the H-1B cap selection process, changing a little bit from what normally does. So the rule when it was released basically stated that instead of the system how irregular has happened for cap selections, basically that one candidate would get like the chance to get selected for the most part once, unless they have a master's, they are able to go through possibly two options for cap selection. Now it's based on basically the candidate's proposed wage. So if a petitioner who's going to be the employer for this H-1B future cap case, is offering a certain wage level that would basically give them basically the amount of chances to get potentially selected for an H-1B. So if it's a level 4, there's a four times chance to get selected. If it's a level 1, it would be one chance. So basically that it's a little bit of the norm of the randomization. It would be more now based on level of wage.
Wow, so quite a few changes there. Can you tell us when does the new rule take effect and which upcoming H-1B cap seasons will it impact?
Yeah, so when the rule was basically released, it was stated that the rule would take effect starting February 27th of 2026, so about a month out, and it would affect the upcoming 2027 fiscal year H-1B cap lottery. So that would be the one that employers or sponsors for petitioners for H-1B would start filing registrations in around sometime around March of this year.
Okay, got it. So we have to start taking action soon. How does this rule change the way USCIS selects H-1B registrations in the lottery?
Yeah, so just to kind of add on to the previous question on like, what the change was basically, like I said briefly, it's based on level, right? So if a sponsor, petitioner will be offering level 4, it would be four times of chance, right? And so this is a big, change with what the normal trend is, which is randomization. This is basically the higher the wage, the better possibility for a petitioner to get a candidate sponsored for H-1B, being able to be selected, right? This is the first part of the process. And what this basically means is, of course, some companies are able and to afford those wages will be able to get a possible better chance for that candidate to be selected. But of course, a lower wage offer would be possibly a lesser likelihood of being able to be selected. How does that look ultimately will determine, once this cap lottery comes through, how it ultimately will reflect on the numbers, of course, of selections, registrations and also selections.
Definitely, we'll keep an eye out for that. Can you tell us who benefits most from this change? Is it employers? Is it employees? Is it both?
I mean, we are yet to see the full, outcome of it, but from, when the rule was posted, part of why the rule came out was because it was, trying to be, uh, you know, in a way, allow for the non incorrect usage of H-1B, right? To be make sure that the candidates are offered a proper wage and yours workers are not being displaced, right? That was the understanding behind it, of course. But when we do dig deep into the role, there is also a potential, effect that, smaller companies will probably not have the ability to pay a much higher salary. So we don't know if it's benefiting one outcome over the other. But our understanding is this is supposed to, allow for a much better facilitating H-1B program. But of course, we won't see this until it goes through the first cycle of H-1B cap. So we'll see what happens.
Understood. And in the past, we know employers have submitted multiple registrations for the same candidate. So will employers still be allowed to submit multiple registrations for the same candidate?
Yeah, so the basically the framework didn't change completely. So if a candidate beneficiary or H-1B candidate, right, wants to have multiple employers, file on their behalf, they can. Okay. So that doesn't change. Of course, that doesn't change as well that they can't have duplicate filings because that's an issue. You can't have the same employer file multiple times. You can't do that. So that doesn't change the overall framework. It's just one part of the process is changing, which is the randomization versus now the wage levels being like one of the changes. So yeah, if the candidate has multiple options for potential sponsorship for the cap lottery, yes, multiple employers that are not related could file on their behalf.
Mm. Can you tell us how the new rule affects companies that work with either multiple vendors or staffing firms, maybe?
So that part of the process is not being, I think to explain it a little bit, because I know that's a very great question, is the selection process is the beginning part of the process. So basically, for the new role, basically all that will be needed is basically the salary offered, the wage offered, the position that they will hold. They don't ask yet for the registration part of it, if they're going to have like end client vendors. So that won't be any of the questions. But of course, I think that's more of consideration for a company to determine what they're feasibly going to be able to offer for a wage. Because one of the things that was mentioned was that whatever wage is mentioned on the selection should be also reflected when the cap petition is actually filed. So you can't change anything that was filed on the registration if you do get selected for that candidate for the actual petition. So everything must match.
Okay, got it. And can you tell us about the risks that exist now for employers who submit improper or duplicate registrations?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, duplicates still nothing's changed. If you do a duplicate for the same petitioner, that would disqualify that candidate beneficiary for the lottery. So that's a big no-no. You can't do that. Now, in regards to improper filings, I was briefly touching on this, but I want to further expand it because a very, very good important point, which is basically like I mentioned, anything that's filed on the registration process should be reflected on the actual H-1B petition. If for some reason it's not matching, they can, you know, ultimately not approve the petition, the H-1B cap petition. So you want to make sure that everything basically tracks with information that is correctly reflected on everything. So it's basically very close eye on the whole process is very important. So make sure, of course, that you're well working with a well-versed attorney that understands the nuances of both procedures.
Great insights. And yes, if you are watching this and have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to guide you on this. Can you tell us if there are any new compliance or documentation responsibilities that employers should be preparing for?
Yeah, so one of the things that, for the registration process now, because of the change in the selection rule, previously, we wouldn't need to submit anything in regards to like wage, and like I've been mentioning wage and then like work location and anything like that, right? Now it's information that the attorney that will be working with the company to file these registrations will need to know because that is information that, they need to know for purposes of the registration process. So now it's really important for any companies that do want to file the H-1B registrations that they have that on hand. So the sooner the better, so that they're able to prepare the registrations with their attorney on time. It's only a very short amount of span of time that you are able to file the registration. So that information should be very available so that it does facilitate the process for the registration.
Good to know. Do we have any information on how this rule impacts foreign nationals who previously relied on multiple employers to improve their selection chances?
Yeah, so like I mentioned briefly before, the actual framework of having multiple offers from unrelated companies is still a viability. Is you just can't have the same company sponsor you multiple for different wage levels. But if you have multiple potential offers with different companies, that it's still fine. It's not changing that part of the framework. It's just changing basically the one offer. If that one offer comes with a lower level, you only get a certain amount of chances. But if the other offer has higher level, then that's a little bit of the difference. But that's still a viability. But of course, it's very important to individually speak with an attorney to walk you through how the process would look.
Will this change increase or decrease overall H-1B approval odds for qualified candidates?
So, in regards to how that looks, we're still, like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to, we'll see on the first round and the cap selections how that ultimately will look. We don't know how the numbers will actually look for the registrations and the selections process. It varies every year, so, it fluctuates. What we will try to see is, if the numbers will come down because, certain level wages are higher rather than other localities, basically. But the overall like substance of the requirements for H-1B once they are selected doesn't change. So it's just changing part of the process, but not the whole process. So adjudication still remain the same at the end of the day for H-1B.
Can you share with us some of the insights you're giving to employers for how they should adjust their H-1B planning strategy for the 2026 cap season that's coming up?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's a very common question right now that, how should, companies prepare now that there is a change for the cap selection process. Fully understanding and maybe, having a close conversation with, heads or HRs or whoever to see which are the viable candidates that potentially will get offered. What's the viability of really being understanding of what they are willing and able to offer for a salary, because that really is going to be a very important fact when it comes to the process, because like I mentioned earlier, that salary will track the whole process. So you want to make sure you're cognizant of that. Make sure you're cognizant about, that information will need to be reflective correctly. And then, of course, aside from that, make sure you're very open with your attorney that you're working with so that they have that information ahead of time for this process. Again, it's a very short amount of span that the cap selection process gets registered and then selected. So a quick turnaround will allow for the facilitation from both sides.
Is there anything that foreign nationals should do differently when they're discussing sponsorship with potential employers?
Yeah, I think that's a, case by case situation with that. I mean, a lot of the conversation should be, of course, making sure that, both parties are cognizant about where the potential individual will be working because that will have an effect on the salary. So being cognizant if they foresee different localities of work, that they acknowledge that fact. Be very, realistic about what the wage is, where the locality of work is. Uh, Being understanding, of course, if there is the possibility that a lower wage is being offered, that there may be a potential less likelihood of being selected, and being understanding of that situation and still being okay with still filing that registration as well. So there's a lot of course, changes, but a lot of understanding and realism that the procedure, and once we see it, we're gonna have a better guiding point of how that would look like in the years to come.
Okay, we'll keep an eye out for that as well. Does this rule impact wage levels, job offers, or specialty occupation analysis?
Yeah, so the first one I can answer is not affecting the specialized occupation analysis because that was in touch with this with this election rule. Um, Whether it changed the wage level, the wage level is sent by the Department of Labor, so that's not being affected, sorry. But of course, it does implement the selection, does ask for the wage. So to a certain extent, the understanding is with this rule is the higher the wage, the higher possibility to a certain extent. That means that potentially this year's round of lottery selections may only be offered possibly a higher salary than what the norm would usually been for past years. How that is going to affect future filings, we are going to come to see. We don't know the full extent of that, but everything else really beyond just the actual selection process for registrations basically is the only thing that really changed. Everything else remains the same. Extensions, cap exempt petitions are not affected by this part of the rule. Everything else remains status quo.
Can you tell us how this change aligns with USCIS's broader enforcement and fraud prevention efforts?
Yeah, so when this rule came out, part of the information that was put out by USCIS, this rule is basically trying to work on making sure that the program for H-1B is not basically being, um, taken to a certain extent advantage for, and that candidates who are being sponsored are being offered a proper wage. And then also that there's no displacement of US workers. So I think that goes in tune to what they want to focus on, which is, enforcement and then also fraud and prevention for specifically any program which involves as well the H-1B program.
What about cap-exempt employers? Are cap-exempt employers affected by this rule in any way?
Yeah, so cap exempt employers, so I think I want to make sure I'm a little bit defining a little bit of the cap exempt part. So there's two ways for cap exempt. For an individual that's already gone through the cap lottery, this has no effect. For cap exempt employers, if they're part of the higher institution or anything like that, that means that if the that petitioner wants to sponsor somebody that wants to do the lottery. It's a little bit awkward because usually if they're cap exempt, they're not going to the lottery. So basically, if anybody wants to go through the lottery, they would be subject to this fee rule, basically. But if that higher institution doesn't want to do the lottery for that candidate, then they would not have to worry about this part of the rule, basically.
And for any companies that may have missed past lotteries, does this rule create a more level playing field?
Yeah, so the basic understanding from the fee rule is that, if you don't offer a higher wage, there's a lesser possibility. So if you haven't done the registration before for any candidate before, you're going to come into this different system that everybody's really just trying to see how it's going to look like. It's really to a certain extent before it was a randomization process, so nobody really had a, better chance because everybody kind of had the same chance. Now, from our understanding, it is basically higher wage, higher possibility of selection. So to a certain extent, it's a little bit of the inverse from what we've been used to. If it's going to play out that way, we'll see in this first round of the cap lottery.
Great. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for all of these insights. I want to ask you one final question. What steps should employers and employees take right now to prepare ahead of the February 27th, 2026 effective date?
Yeah, so the most important thing is to really just, have that internal conversation within the company regarding which candidates you do want to do this process. Be really realistic on how the wage offer, who do you want to sponsor? Because, this is really going to track if they do get selected. You want to make sure you have a viable H-1B petition. So make sure you're cognizant of all that information ahead of time. Make sure you're itemizing all this information with app time, not, as you get closer to the cap lottery, because, you don't want to have all these thorough discussions once you get to cap lottery, and then, you only have 2 weeks for the registration process. So I make sure you're ready to go if you are going to file registrations, hopefully day one. and have that conversation as well, including your attorney, whoever you're working with. Hopefully it's you, and then you go from there. So being very well prepared ahead of time for this change and having those conversations with your attorney ahead of time will really be really effective for your preparation once H-1B lottery hits.
Wow, so many wonderful insights today. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for taking the time. That is all we have time for today. So this brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, a special thank you to you, Jocelyn, for being here with us. To stay up to date, please subscribe and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you have any questions or suggestions, send us an email at info@troop.com. Let us know what topic you want to see next, and make sure to join us back here next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care, everyone. Thank you again for joining us.